There we go. Thank you so much. And maybe you can move to the next slide. And let's go one more. We'll get this started. So the future of work. So let's think about this. Back in February, the world of work, February, March, the world's changed forever. On March 13th, which was for most companies, most IT people got that call, and it said, we're going to go through the biggest DR test of the world, business continuity. We're not only sending the employees home, but the clients are going to be home. We have to figure this all out. And it was a little bit of a panic. And so we went through many, many stages. I think the first stage we called was working at work, and we'll go through that. That was the way it used to be. And then we started living at work. As you can see, I'm living at work. And then I think we've gone through an evolution. We started figuring out this is not a snow day. This is not a 2-week test. This is going to be long-term. And so I'm so glad to say that we're at a state now that we're calling redefining work. Because I think now we need to look out and we need to figure out what are our next steps going forward. We need a plan. So maybe if you can click to the next slide. So remember, back in February, this is a history lesson. Imagine that in February, we started densifying our offices. We started putting in huddle rooms. There were coffee breaks. We had water cooler chat. The offices were a little tighter. People were learning to collaborate and innovate face-to-face, physically. And back then, statistically, about 97% of the employees worked in traditional offices, and only 3% of the employees really worked full-time from home. And a lot of those were gig workers. So really, this was the first normal. This is what we grew up with. This is the way it's always been. And then in March, that ended. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, one back, please. Okay, very familiar sight. Now what happened was this. It's Friday night, we all went home, and come Monday, we had to learn how to work while living at work. And some of the rules had to change. Our lives changed. First of all, we started using personal tools. Video conferencing became very big, right? Because we had to keep people connected, because communication was very, very important. And in that first week, it really wasn't about productivity and collaboration. It was about communications. And a lot of tools came into place that normally didn't. And so we started using professional tools in our personal life. We started using personal tools in our professional life. And we started to see, hey, wait a second, we need things that work easy, simple. How do we get people supported and collaborative? It was difficult. I mean, most companies, they worked harder. They worked longer hours. They had to wait for the kids to go to bed so that they could do mail. Managers had a tough time. Most of the managers, they manage while walking around. Their tribal knowledge. They fly by people's desks and they get updates and statuses. And all of a sudden, my staff is now virtual. Oh, but I am too. And so that was a little bit difficult back then. Let's go to the next slide. We also had to learn that distractions are part of the norm. Look at today, we started a little bit late. That's acceptable, right? Companies had to figure out now, how do people work virtually and securely? Because now they are working from home. Video conferencing played a big part, whether it's Zoom or other products, because that was keeping us not only connected to work, that wasn't keeping us in communication with work, it was also keeping us connected to our families. So you hear stories of people on Zoom calls all day long, but then they're on Zoom calls all night because they're connected with their friends and family. And we had to get back to finding that balance. Those 12, 15-hour days weren't going to continue. And people really, in the second phase of living at work, needed to find that right balance between work and personal. You know, you're always connected to work with your computer. And when you hear that little bing and it's 9 o'clock at night, people just run and they answer emails. I remember I had a talk one night at 9 o'clock at night, and the email came in and it said, do you want to talk at 9 o'clock at night? And then it said, what else are you doing? And it was kind of true. What else am I doing? So let's go to the next slide. Okay, but now we're into this, at this point, evolving at work a couple of months, and the realization of we're not going back to the old normal ever. So now really we had to get to a place where we could work. And companies, I think, addressed this 3 ways. The first thing I saw was they fought it. They fought it. We're going back to work. We're going back to work. We fought it. I don't think that was the right choice. The second group mimicked what they did at work at home. And so they use the technology. So an example is, I talked to a team and I said, well, what do you mean mimic? They said, well, we open a Zoom call every single morning. We keep it open in the corner of our screen and we chat all day long, just like we did at work. Because the four of us have sat together. We group think, we group work. Okay. So what they did is they went home and they figured out how to bring work home with them in the way they worked at home. Sort of like a perpetual water cooler. Here's the third company. They took advantage of this. They figured out how to make this a positive experience, how to get collaboration, how to think about things in a much different way. How do we think about collaboration and productivity? How do we measure that? Right? And at this point here, since we're not going back to work the old way, we started to think about what is that phased approach we're going to take to going back to work? Because we're still hopeful at this phase that we're going to go back to work en masse, and we know it's going to be in a phased approach. And now video conferencing is becoming a norm. It's table stakes now going forward. And about 50% of the organizations we talked to said over 80% of their staff is currently working from home right now. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is a good stat. 8 out of 10 remote workers are very satisfied about how the company handled the transition. And I think that's really good because a lot of the companies in the first week probably were, just like everything else, trying to figure it out. The largest DR test that I could imagine, business continuity testing. And so for 8 out of 10 to really sit back and say they were satisfied on how the company handled it, it meant the company was able to get them collaborative and productive, give them the equipment that they needed, support them at home, and stay in communication with them, which is very, very important. The other thing a lot of companies did was they worked on work-life balance. And I love stories, so I hope you don't mind, but there was a CEO who called a 90-minute webinar, all hands mandatory. Okay, so 10 o'clock in the morning, everybody blocks their calendar, 90 minutes, the boss is going to talk. He gets on the webinar and he said, I know everyone in my company now has their calendar blocked for 90 minutes because I told you to do that. There is no webinar. Go hug your kids. Go for a walk around the block. Go have an extra cup of coffee. Walk to Starbucks and get a cup of coffee. But as a company, let's not do anything for the next 90 minutes. And what he tried to do was build work-life balance. And he tried to show to his staff that it's okay to walk away from the screen for 5 minutes. It's okay to leave, and get a cup of coffee down at Starbucks. And what he tried to show was you have to get that balance right. And I have lots of stories about how companies are trying to do that. Some companies, when I talk to them, one CEO, he put a line on the ground, a piece of tape in his office, and he taught the kids, when daddy's on the left side of the tape, I'm working. When daddy's on the right side of the tape, I'm daddy. And so people try to figure out at this point, how do I perpetuate this working from home? Let's go to the next statistic, or the next slide, please. Also, 70% of the companies are now doing the right thing. They're providing equipment at home. They're allowing employees to take stuff home if they needed to. They're paying for their internet bill. For instance, Zoom pays for stand-up desks if you're working at home and things like that. So I think right now the companies are looking at, okay, they're home. Now, how do we empower them to be the best worker at home? By giving them the tools that they need. Some of it is applications, some of it is stipends to offset some of the costs, and some of it is just making equipment available to make the transition a little easier. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, but now's the part we need to talk about, because now we're in that really great state of, now we're going to redefine work. We see going back, and some companies have done it successfully, and some companies have failed. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a statistic from May, but really when we go back to work, it is going to be a little bit like a biohazard, and I kind of agree with this. As I talk to companies, I talked to a company the other day, and they allowed people to come back to work. You have to wear a mask unless you have an office. If you have an office and you close the door, you don't have to wear a mask. So I talked to one of the CIO there, and I said, how did it work out? He said, well, here's what happens. I go to work. I don't want to work in a mask all day. So I close my door, which is not like me because I have an open door policy. Now with my door closed, so I don't have to put a mask on, when I need to talk to someone on the floor, I Zoom them. So I'm on Zoom calls from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night, and then I go home. He said, why did I come to work? Because that was what my home life was. I can see people going by, But because the corporate rule is I can't open my door unless I put a mask on, we end up Zooming each other, video conferencing each other, texting each other, chatting each other during the day. Let's go to the next slide. Some technology will never be the same. I worked with a company in New York, and they did an employee survey, and the employees are worried about items being sanitized. The phone is a great example, because remember, we put phones in huddle rooms. We put phones in open seating areas. And by putting phones in those different areas, multiple people use those phones during the day. And when you look back, you probably go, hey, that probably wasn't a great idea. Okay, so here's what they decided. There was no way, they worked with the cleaning company, there was no way they were going to sanitize every single phone every single night. It took too long, and it was going to be too expensive. They took the cost of what it was going to take to sanitize that phone so an employee would use it, and they eliminated the phone. They put the phone into the computer and immediately went to voice over IP. Now there's a big benefit there, because now when the employees are working home, they have the same phone number at work. But they went one step further. They said, why don't we give all the employees a foldable keyboard, a small mouse, and a headset, and tell them to take it home every night? When the employee comes to work, whether they work every day or a hybrid schedule, when they come in, what they do is they put their keyboard down, their mouse down, their headset down, and they're able to work. But all the items they touch, they are in control of. That was just a novel idea. And so I probably think that the phone will be the first to go completely in the offices. Why don't we go to the next slide? So visualizing the 6-foot office. As we talk to employees and we do surveys, they want guidelines. They want to know, what are the rules for working in the new world when I come back to work? But there was a couple of things that they talked about. They understand that there'll be mask restrictions in certain rooms. They understand that we might have to walk a certain way, counterclockwise or clockwise, so face-to-face doesn't happen. They understand that certain rooms will be limited, where this room can only have 3 people, and huddle rooms went from 2 to 1 and became small offices. But one of the things that we saw in all the surveys is they want the company to enforce the rules and not them. In other words, when I sat down with them and I said, well, what do you mean? I don't want to have to tell my peer, I'm sorry, but you're in a mask-only zone. You need to put a mask on. I'm sorry, this room is limited to 4. There are 4 of us in here. You can't come in. And they wanted to make sure that the company was supporting these rules and they didn't have to do it person by person. Let's go to the next slide. And so what does the office of the future look like? You know, I think that this is, first of all, I want to say this. I've been in technology 40 years. And we always used to have this saying in technology, if we could ever land the plane, we could make major changes. Well, for technology people, the plane has never been lowered to the ground. The second thing is there's never been an appetite to make improvements. And third, there is money to spend on changing what we're doing. And so I think there's never been a better time in my whole career to be in technology. But employees do want to feel safe and secure. And some of the things that we see in the office of the future is, if myself and someone goes into a video conference room to video another team member, when we come out of that room, we expect that room to be cleaned. And one of the things they said was, in order to feel safe and secure, we want to see cleaning staff on the floor all day long. We want to see that when someone leaves, that if there is a phone, that's sanitized. If it was a multi-purpose room, they went in and cleaned the keyboards and the surfaces and whatever methods that we have today. I also think what people are going to see in the future is, we are going to see video everywhere, because in all these situations, it looks like hybrid is going to be the way to go. And with hybrid, we need contactless video in order to connect with people at home. And the analogy I use here is, look, there are 4 people on a team. It's my week and my buddy's week to work. We're on the A week. We come up with a great idea. The people that we deal with every single day in our team, they're on a different schedule, so we need to keep them up to date. So we believe that we're going to see video almost everywhere, and we're going to see more of those small collaboration rooms. Those medium-sized conference rooms will take over for huddle rooms, and the large conference rooms will now become medium rooms and so forth. And the huddle rooms will actually just become small private offices. Why don't we go to the next slide? So a couple of things that will keep that'll drive remote workers? Well, 41% of the workers want to work remotely. At the end of the day, that general concern for safety and limit of exposure is going to end up keeping people home. Now, there's office workers, and that's been a little bit easier for people to work remotely. As we talk to people in manufacturing, they are also working out ways how more and more people can work remotely. But the analogy I use is I can't build a car at home. I have to go to work for that. And even they're changing the way that they work. A great story came out of one of the roundtables we did is they got everybody to work. What they said was they staggered everybody coming to work, so there wasn't this mass of coming in at 8 o'clock in the morning. Everybody went to their manufacturing stations. That was great. But they have a common break time. And when everybody went back to the break rooms to get coffee or lunch, they ended up having to take their masks off. And so what they did was they actually took a little bit of a thing that we used to hear about in Silicon Valley companies is they now got what we used to call the beer cart, and they turned it into the coffee cart. And rather than leaving the floor to come to break rooms, they deliver coffee to all their employees while they're working during the day so that they don't have to come in. Okay, let's go to the next slide. 3/4 of the adults who work remotely now, they're going to want to continue to work at least 1 to 2 days. I think we've figured out some of the misnomers of the past are you can't work securely home. Yes, we can. You can't work productively home. Well, we proved that wrong also. And so a lot of the things that were keeping the push towards full-time work from home, or at least part-time work from home, along the way, I think we've broken those misnomers. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in the next normal, there are things that we have to think about. As Zoom, we hire all the time. And at the end, I want to talk about what we're doing in Pittsburgh. But as you're onboarding new employees, that's becoming a little bit harder. Getting signature paperwork. I don't think companies were set up for things like that. A lot of the training that we used to do, even in person in Zoom, has now gone virtual. And now we are really looking at technologies that are going to allow us to go back to being agile and resilient. Video conferencing, not because I work for Zoom, but video conferencing is becoming it's table stakes now. You need to have some form of video conferencing so people can stay connected. Let's go to the next slide. So what does the next normal look like? Because like I said, we're leaving this redefining stage now. And I think this is really the stage where we get to make the mistakes and the successes. We need to learn from them. Part of my CISO hat says, you never waste a good chaos. And we've gone through a period of chaos right now. And now we need to learn from every one of those mistakes that we made and every one of the successes, because there's just as many success stories as moving people home. So let's go to the next slide. This is the limit. We talked about this a second ago, is that right now, some of the limitations are not there anymore. Talent we can find anywhere. We see a lot of people moving out of big metropolitans like New York and things like that. We can find talent anywhere. It's no longer has to be geographically close to where the offices are. The other thing is we have to allow the workers to work the way they want, where they want, and how they want, which means, and I know it's on another slide here, but it means that we have to figure out, I might want to work from 10 to 7 because I need to get my child ready for e-learning in the morning. And for me to have meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning while I'm trying to get them on the platform and getting started is hard. And so I think we're going to see is that they're going to allow people to work a lot differently than we did before. And that you don't need to work in that 8 hours anymore. Let's go to the next slide. So remote and hybrid working is going to be the new norm. I don't think we've heard of any company so far that, besides companies that need to go back to work like frontline workers, restaurants, hair salons, gyms, they can't do their job from home. But I think what a lot of companies are doing is they're redefining jobs. We worked with one company where they said, look, some of our employees, 80% of what they do, they can do from home. 20% of what they do, they can't do from home. So they're reassessing. If Gary can do 80% of his job from home, well, why don't we figure out how to give the 20% to someone else who has to go to work for another reason physically and move more work to Gary that's more conducive from working from home. So I think what's happening is companies are really saying, okay, hybrid's going to be the way to work. How do we divide the work now based on where people are going to be physically? Let's go to the next slide, please. So I think there's a couple of common themes that we see here. Video is going to be table stakes. We have to make sure that people are set up at home to work the right way, but not only at home, we need to make sure that the technology that's in work, as well as the technology that's home, is the correct technology. A lot of people went home and they didn't have the right headsets, they didn't have the right cameras, and I think what we need to do is figure that out going forward. We need to think about new ways about thinking about work and beyond the current normal. Those who are thinking about just getting people back to work, they really need to start thinking about way into the future. So I keep telling people, I don't think whatever the next normal is going to be the final normal. I think we're going to go through this redefining phase several times. And as we keep going through this redefining phase, we're going to learn new ways about how to keep people productive, how to keep them collaborative, and how to allow our employees to work the way they want to work. When I gave this in February, a very similar presentation, it was a forward-thinking future of work. And it was all about looking at the people that work and how they want to work. And it was actually about putting us into different categories like millennials and Gen Zs. I think one of the things that we've seen through this is, I'm clearly not a millennial, but I think like one now. And so the things that I thought about back in February have changed greatly over the last 6 months that I've been working home. And so I think the companies that are really moving forward are embracing those company values, and they're empowering their users to work the way they want to work. But I think they're also giving them what I'm labeling enabling technology. And enabling technology is just not technology you buy off the shelf. It's technology that it's simple to use. It's technology that interfaces with everything else they do. And so I think by embracing employee values, enabling them to work the way they want to work, and giving them technology that supports that is going to be the power companies of the future. I think I have one more slide. One more slide. And so we're open, I don't know who knows this, but we're opening up a research and development center in Pittsburgh and in Phoenix. I think we're going to try and situate it really near some of the colleges. And so I'm really proud to say that Zoom is coming to Pittsburgh. If you're a software engineer and you want to work at Zoom in Pittsburgh, please feel free to just send me your resume and I'll make sure I get it to the right people. And with that, I'd love to open it up to some questions. So let's see. Will there be a Q&A, or do you want me to just read questions off the list? Okay, without that, I think I'll just read them off the list. You need a mask. So there's one about you need a mask anyway due to aerosol transmission through HVAC. I got that. Now it came in from Dave Brown. I think a lot of the companies are now looking at changing their HVAC systems, but I do agree that as we go back, most people will want to continue to wear a mask due to HVAC issues. What is your perspective on the fact a lot of people will continue to work remotely even after the pandemic? What will happen to all the office space? Will there be a surplus of space? So I did a roundtable with a lot of the real estate people, and I'll tell you they are biased. And I'm usually a moderator, and I asked them, is the office dead? Well, I got jumped on a little bit. But part of it is that I think while less people will go back to work, they will require more space. And when we get to what they're calling the 6-foot office, and when we get to spacing people out, most large companies went through a densification over the last year. And what that means is, in some cases, my keyboard touched the person to the left and right of me. And so I think when we get back, the first thing is going to be is, how are we going to figure out how much space everyone needs based on the space we already have? So I don't know if there's going to be a surplus, but I do think there will be some sort of adjustment. Remote hiring. So remote hiring has been, as we talk to people, I will tell you, remote hiring has been something that I started seeing at the beginning of this. Even before we had COVID, a lot of people were doing video conference hiring as the first hiring. And I did a remote hire when I started with Zoom. So I met many people over Zoom first. It was actually a really good experience. And then I didn't actually meet people from Zoom until after I was hired on board, and I did my first trip out to California. Biggest remote issue for me is echo. Echo when someone's speakers come back to their mic. The company that filters background noise the same way they filter background noise will zoom to the top of the heap. I like that. We'll zoom to the top of the heap. Well, for those who are on the new version of Zoom, you will notice that there is a functionality in there where my neighbor right now could be cutting his lawn and you will never hear it, or you will hear it in a much diminished manner. And so we have a way of getting rid of background noise. But I do agree. And one of the things this brings up is, and this wasn't a question, so just Gary's opinion is, we are moving to a more professional state of working from home. And the way I use it is, it's time to get sports t-shirts off of the Zoom calls. It's time to get the cat off of the Zoom calls, and to move back to where we are having a call that's not interrupted by the neighbor cutting his lawn, or the garbage man in the driveway making noise, or those loud extra noises, or children running in. So I think we're seeing that while we're putting technology in place to minimize that, people are changing the way they work. Let's see. I agree with that. We're talking about, I'm trying to read some of these through as I go through. You think if there was a vaccine, we will need to space out? I don't know. I'm not medical on that side, but I would think that I think we're never going back to work the old way, with or without a vaccine. I think we are going to change the way we work, and we are probably going to be a little further apart than in that densification. I came from big banks my whole career, and big banks did move people to work closer. They got rid of cubicles and high walls. And I worked with one CIO in New York, and I said, "What is your plan?" He said, "I'm going to Brooklyn." I go, "What do you mean you're going to Brooklyn?" He says, "I'm going to Brooklyn to buy all the high wall cubicles that I sold, probably $1 a piece. They already have our logo on them, and I'm probably going to buy them back for $100 a piece, because right now they're worth more to me." So I think we're still going to see a change in the physical. Features. It says, what features of Zoom reduces background noise? You can just drop me a note. I'll send you the listing. I know there's a lot of people are saying that they love to see the cats online, but in some cases, especially with client interactions, I think we're trying to change that a little bit. And so as we move to this redefining phase, I think what we're going to do is we're going to see people, and I don't want to say a more professional, because that's not what I really mean. It's just a more focus at work from 8 to 5, and with a little bit of less of the interruptions. I see they're talking about, we're the software developers in Pittsburgh. We found that our developers really want to get back to the office to collaborate better and be together. Most are back-to-back 3 days. So at the end of the day, I do agree. We are working on a lot of things with a lot of companies so they can continue to do peer programming. A lot of the developers will bring up Zoom screens and develop together. But I do know that team developing and peer developing has been very, very popular. So I think with that, I think we're at time, right, Monica? Sora, come on real quick.
We are. Yeah, we are waiting for Audrey to come back in to give some closing remarks. But thank you so much for the really great presentation. This was great. I see we had some active chat going on here, so this is wonderful. Here comes Audrey.
Well, I normally say this at the end of every time I speak, and I know Zoom thinks I'm crazy, but my name is Gary Sorrentino, and I'm at gary.sorrentino@zoom.us. And if you have a comment, you have a note, you have a question, it just said Ben Williams, what's Gary's email address? I give it out every single time. Gary.sorrentino at zoom.us. And please just drop me a note.
Okay, so Gary, thank you so much for being here. As a native New Yorker, I love your accent, and since Zoom, my accent has returned. So it was thrilling to hear you and to make all your points in the comments that we've had. So really appreciate you taking the time with us. And we are excited, and we're hoping that Zoom does make a presence here in Pittsburgh. So we will make sure that we get information to you and get it to the right person.
And thank you very much for allowing Zoom to present here.